All right, welcome back to Kingdom Refresh. This is our third installment of this, and we are currently in Matthew 5:21 through 26, talking about anger, reconciliation, murder.
What's that supposed to mean?
Scared him. So yeah, we're talking about murder today.
That's fun.
Yeah, we need a soundboard. So obviously, if you've been listening, we'd love for you to check out our sermons and stuff. Check out our church if you're nearby. And we're just going to kind of unpack a little bit about this section of scripture and talk about it and get a little more in depth, and hope that you get something out of it.
Yeah. So in case you didn't catch it, we are calling the podcast Kingdom Refresh, because we're going to be settling into the Kingdom series. We're in the series Kingdom Clarity, in which you can actually get this 17-week devotional, which we've created here at Cross Church, in order for you to stay in the Word and track along with the Sermon on the Mount all throughout the week. And at the end of every day or every chapter, there's an action point for you to actually let it play out. Because, it starts off with you are salt, you are light, not just to remain in the container, not just to clump together with other pieces of salt. You ever open up your salt shaker and you have to hit it against your knee to get it to break
when
up
it's
a little
so
bit?
hard.
So
it's like you haven't used it in a while.
Yeah, because it clumps together,
Yeah.
it gets a little more moisture in there. So that this is for you to just break up the salt every day, to recognize that, I'm not meant to only be salt and light in the pews. I'm meant to be salt and light in every area. And so there's little things like, hey, encourage a friend with a text, or it's nothing like monumental. It's not like, hey, pay off a mortgage or something like that. It's something that's attainable, is within your reach. If you'd like to get a hold of one of these, we can let you know. You could either comment or just send an email to info@thecrossmatters.org, or just go to thecrossmatters.org/resource, and it's available there for your gift of any size, basically. We suggest $20 or more, so we're not losing money on it, but we don't want cost to be prohibitive. We want you to be able to follow along with it. And now a word from our sponsors. So that was basically the housekeeping.
Also, too, if you don't have the book, every Tuesday and Thursday, there is a challenge that's posted in the morning, which corresponds to what's happening in the book as well. So even if you don't have it, there's still the opportunity to see those and check those out and hopefully do them, because they're pretty great. Some of them are kind of difficult, honestly.
They are.
But that's kind of the point, is it's called a challenge for a reason.
Yes. Yeah.
But so I mean, you were gone.
Yes, I was gone last week. I actually went back to, some would say, the promised land. Some would say the wasteland. I went back to Southern California for a week. It was my wife's 40th birthday. No, it was her 20th anniversary of her 20th birthday.
Yeah, there you go.
And so we were with family and friends. We got to visit our old church, Calvary Chapel, which is really cool. Had lunch with a lot of people. Probably put on 5 pounds. Went to Universal Studios, which I highly recommend. If you're ever going to California, everybody wants to go to Disneyland. You're going to spend so much money going to Disneyland, and you're not going to get hardly anything done because it's so incredibly crowded. In my opinion, not worth the money. Go to Universal Studios and Knott's Berry Farm. Go do the Paramount Studio tour. That's super fun to do.
I would love to do that.
Go down to La Jolla. It's like a 2-hour drive down to San Diego. Amazing. There's sea lions out just chilling. You can see
crazy.
them and walk on the beach with some sea lions. Go to Seaport Village. I'll be your travel agent if you want to go to Southern California, to all the really good places.
Yeah, and in Illinois, if you drive down the street a bit, you might see a shirtless man with wheat in his mouth or something.
I
don't know if that's a equivalent to a sea lion,
very
but
similar to a sea lion. Yeah. Oh, San Diego. If you go to San Diego, I mean, SeaWorld is actually pretty dang cool.
Yeah.
There's a lot of that. Yeah.
Yeah. So I enjoyed preaching. It was fun. And I got to talk about a fun topic, I guess. But yeah, it's, because I think it's the problem is a lot of people see it as the murder anger, but really it is about the reconciliation, the forgiveness, which, you know, that's the bigger side of this little passage here is, you know, like, how do you reconcile? When do you reconcile? How important is forgiveness? All of that stuff. And so, you know, I think that that's obviously probably majority of what we're going to talk about today would be the reconciliation aspect, but
Yeah.
you know, also it lends itself to kind of talk about the discussion that Jesus had there that was very contrary to what
Mm-hmm.
the Jewish law was, you know,
Yeah.
and in fact probably made a couple jaws drop, I would assume, from the Sanhedrin Pharisees, get, you know, those kind of guys. But
Yeah. It's interesting because he gives a true biblical definition of what murder actually is, right?
Yeah.
We always assume that the commandment is thou shalt not kill. You always hear it said that way.
Yeah.
That's truthfully not what it is thou shalt not murder. And so up until this point, they're probably conflating the two, right? And so he defines what murder is, and it starts in the heart. It
Yeah.
starts with anger, hatred, and that outflows into
Anger
action.
leads to hate.
Yes, yes.
Hate leads to suffering. Sorry.
You got to finish it.
I can't remember.
Suffering leads to the dark
Oh,
side.
yeah. I like the dark side.
Yeah. Brooding.
Suffering leads to Jedi.
Now go kill your dad.
Yeah. Yeah.
What?
Yeah.
Yeah. Wait a minute.
Master Skywalker. Sorry.
Anyway. Yeah. So that's murder, right? And so it starts in the heart. And so if you have hate for your brother in your heart, you are guilty of it.
Yeah.
That's a big thing because a lot of us, especially in our culture, don't go to the step of taking a life, but we are well on our way to displaying hatred and anger. If you don't believe me, post just a little bit of controversial stuff on Facebook or Instagram or YouTube and just see the hate pile in.
Yeah.
People nowadays think the acceptable target for hate is someone who I disagree with. If I disagree with you, I'll take off, all the gloves are off. I'm going to punch you as hard as I can.
Yeah.
Because I'm right and you're wrong. That's a very, very dangerous place to be.
Yeah. And well, that was one of the things I talked about was, when like you're at Walmart and you see the person that you're fighting with and you're like, oh, I guess I'm going to look at bacon now.
Yeah.
It's like the just avoidance and, cause I talked about how like it causes stress and anxiety and things like that. And we don't think about those things. We're just like, oh yeah, I'm mad at that person. But it's like, when I see them, I get frustrated. I get stressed, I'm trying to avoid them, which is causing me more mental, whatever. It causes emotional issues, like as it just continues to linger and those kind of things. And how it basically has control over you. Like it is literally something that you cannot get out of your head and you will continue to think about until you go, okay, I'm done with that. And obviously that's the reconciliation part. That's why it's so important. And that's why Jesus spent, a lot of effort on that aspect of comparing it to debts that are owed and comparing it to legal action and things like that. So that they could understand just the level of what this does to your body and to your mind. And it is constantly going to be a burden until you decide to say, I'm done. Yeah. I'm not going to do that anymore. I'm not going to think that anymore. I forgive you. Or will you forgive me? You know? 'Cause that right there, again, it's the other side is like, somebody's holding resentment towards me. That can cause stress too. When you know that somebody's frustrated with you and you're just like, what can I do to make it better? What can I do? Especially if you see them all the time, things like that, or family, when you have family struggles and family stress, like all of those things, it all is kind of combined into
Yeah.
this little 5 verses here.
Yeah, I like that you brought up um, the whole court aspect, the whole legal battle aspect of it, and really kind of exposited what that means, especially in terms of the culture. We still have this today actually. Like Judge Judy is I think Judge Judy is still
I
on.
think so, yeah.
I think if you follow the Daily Wire, they are basically doing a ripoff version of like Judge. They call it Judge, and it's Matt Walsh being a judge. It's like these people are out there letting their legal battles be played out. Judge Reinhold or whatever. I forget
Yeah.
what all the different judge. People's
Judge Joe
Court.
Brown.
Yeah, the People's Court, all this stuff. Because for some reason it's really entertaining to watch people argue, right?
Yeah.
And it's not a healthy thing.
Yeah.
Well, this is an age old thing. Basically, if you ever heard the term the bema seat, that's the judgment seat, and we always think of it in terms of like God sitting on his throne judging. It's quite actually less grand than that. The place to go to be entertained was the public square, where there was a judge, just like the People's Court. It's pretty funny. And people would gather around and watch legal proceedings. They would watch people argue because it was so entertaining. That's literally what would happen in the ancient times. And so when there's anger and hate in your heart, basically Jesus is saying it's going to be that's on public display. And if you're a Christian, if you're a kingdom citizen, yeah, people are going to be watching you argue, and it's not going to show unity at all. It's going to show disunity. It's going to show that my house is divided, and a house divided cannot stand. That wasn't Lincoln, actually. A lot of people go, "Oh, Lincoln said the house of it." He got it from somewhere. Anyway, so the fact that it doesn't just affect your relationship with each other, it affects our ability to be salt and light, which I think is why immediately out the gate, after saying you are the salt of the earth, the light of the world, the law still stands. He goes, now here's one of the most egregious things that you could do to someone. And if you have anger in your heart, it's just as bad. And by the way, people are watching you do this, and it does not show unity. And I think you actually touched on that, the tapestry of unity. Gosh, the strands of, I'm really bad at remembering. I remember it was a great point, and but I don't want to butcher it. But the idea was our unity will show to the world that we are Christ's disciples. That's what Jesus says. Our love for one another. Well, you can't have love for people you're not unified with, right? And so it's such an important thing to keep unity. And part of the way we keep unity is by keeping hatred out of our hearts towards our brothers and sisters. I also think it's interesting that in the Sermon on the Mount, he touches on murder as a springboard for reconciliation. If you look back to Genesis, the first recorded sin in the Bible, other than original sin, right? Other than Adam and Eve eating of the forbidden fruit, the first recorded sin was murder. And we see it play out exactly in Genesis as Christ is warning us against in Matthew chapter 5, right?
Yeah.
If you have hatred towards your brother, if you have hatred, in fact, I have it right here. I don't want to just, what does it say? It says, you've heard our ancient ancestors were told, you shall not murder. If you commit murder, you are subject to judgment. But I say to you, even if you are angry with someone, some translations say, if you harbor hatred in your heart towards your brother, you are guilty. And who harbored hatred in his heart towards his brother? We had Cain and Abel, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it started with anger. It started with jealousy. It started with not offering the right sacrifice, and then being jealous of the one who was doing sacrifice the right way. And then it led to murder of a brother. And then after that, it led to God confronting him and saying, hey, what's going on? And he's like, oh, am I my brother's keeper? Right? Am I my brother's keeper? Well, the answer to that question is, yeah, you are, right?
Mm-hmm.
You are your brother's keeper. This isn't an individual kind of like, I'm going to get mine, like our culture suggests. It's like, hey, you need to get yours. You're a girl boss. Keep hustling, keep going. Don't let anything or anybody stand in the way of your dreams. That's not what Christ says,
Mm-hmm.
right? You're for your brother. You are your brother's keeper. And he says something interesting that he says, the blood of your brother cries out to me from the ground.
Hmm.
That's interesting. The blood of your brother cries out to me. The things that we'll brush off as, the aftermath of our anger. So in this case, murder. You can't hide anything from God, right? The blood of his brother cries out to God from the ground. So now when Jesus, fast forward, and when Jesus says, if you have hatred in your heart, you're guilty. Well, how does God know, other than to know that he knows what's in our heart?
Mm-hmm.
And the thing that we should be more afraid of than anything else is displeasing God. Is because, and I think you mentioned it, like that anger feels good, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Like, and the more angry, I think you mentioned, the more angry you are, the more easily it is to be angry.
Yes.
If
Yeah.
and the
It's
more
like when
outraged
you're
you are,
angry and you're like, okay, I've got calm. It's way easier to flip that switch
yeah,
back to it, because you've just, I mean, you're basically full of it. Like it
mm-hmm.
might not be present right now, but it's still there. It's way easier to blow up, when the fuse is still hot. Like,
Mm-hmm.
um, you know,
Yeah,
like when that cool thing where you like blow out a candle and then you can like light the smoke, where it like goes back down.
mm-hmm.
But I mean, it's almost that kind of thing where it's like
Interesting.
your flame is out, but the smoke is still.
Mm-hmm.
So if somebody ignites that smoke, it's coming back down, and you're going to have just as big of a flame as before.
Yeah, you have that little ember that's
Yeah.
always burning, and if you blow on the ember, if you breathe on the ember,
It's gonna, yeah,
it'll come back because it has oxygen. So some of us are walking around where it's like, okay, I've calmed down, and then somebody breathes on us, we're like, hey,
yeah,
my kids can do that so easily. It's like,
yeah,
stop breathing so loud, stop chewing so
yeah.
loud, stop arguing. I was sitting in the lovely traffic trying to get to the airport. Man, there's no more feeling of impending doom than when you're late for a flight, and things can just make you so angry. And we were in the traffic and my kids are, yeah, I'm like, shut up. Might have said it even meaner than that,
Traffic is definitely that. I talked about road rage.
Yeah, road
Like,
rage, exactly.
yeah. Well, and that's acceptable anger a lot of times, because it's like, but then, then I also talked about after that, the idea of, walking a mile in somebody else's shoes and not understanding what they're going through, and, not knowing that, maybe they're on their way to the hospital because somebody's hurt or
Mm-hmm.
whatever. Like they cut you off because they are in emotional turmoil.
Right.
And so we rarely ever think about the other person. We just go, and it's the me culture. Like, well, I'm angry because I'm being inconvenienced, when in reality, as Christians specifically, we should be more conscious of like understanding what's going on around us, and
Yeah.
the empathy aspect.
Yeah.
So it was, reconciliation is the art of weaving broken strands into a tapestry of unity. Took forever for me to pull that up. I had to
That
go
was
to
good
Word
though.
doc.
Yeah, that's a good line. Reconciliation is the art of weaving broken strands into
A tapestry
a
of unity.
tapestry of unity. Yeah, that's good. Because, they're still broken strands, but now they're into something more beautiful and useful, right?
Yeah. Well, and what that reminds me of is in Brave,
Mm-hmm.
where they have to sew the tapestry back together
Mm-hmm.
to be able to, mend the bond torn by pride.
Yeah, my kids love that movie.
Yeah.
My son's favorite part of that movie, and he learned this and kept doing this, and we had to yell at him for it, is feast your eyes.
Feast your eyes.
He's just going around mooning everybody. He's like, he goes, Dad. I'm like, yeah. He goes, feast your eyes.
Oh, that's
There's a
great.
little Irish coming out of him.
Yeah.
But
Scottish.
that's,
Sorry.
it is Sky. Well, he's Irish, but
Yeah.
I actually know he's Scottish as well because I'm Scottish.
Yeah.
So yeah, I guess it works.
So just, I have a few questions to give us a little thought process stuff. So in verse 21, Jesus equates anger with murder. Basically, like, how did this kind of challenge the traditional understandings of morality and ethical behavior?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think we touched on it a little
Yeah.
bit. The fact that it's personal. It's not just the outward act. God looks at the heart.
Yeah, and it being completely contrary to what the law was, what
Mm-hmm.
what they were told to follow.
Mm-hmm.
And I even spoke about that on Sunday, where like, and we'll see that all throughout the Sermon on the Mount. Jesus is like expanding the law. He is taking it to another level
Yeah.
that is in fact more difficult. Like, hey, don't murder anyone. Oh yeah, that's fine. I'm not going to murder anyone, but don't get angry at someone. Oh, oh, don't call him an idiot. Oh, like,
Yeah.
like,
Well, and in the act of condemning someone else, don't you yourself commit the act?
yeah,
Right. Oh my gosh, that guy is so terrible. Like you mentioned the murder podcasts and TV shows and things like that. Some of those can make your blood boil.
oh yeah,
You
absolutely.
see someone is so evil that they can do that. How often do we read a news story about, and it usually has to do with kids, right? In fact, this happened in my hometown just a while ago. A mother pushed her 9-year-old and an infant out of the car and then crashed into a tree or something like that to kill herself. And part of you is like, good, you know, I'm glad she's died. But then the other part of it is like, well, that's not good to feel that way.
Yeah,
That's not how God wants me to feel. Does she know the Lord? Is she eternally separated from God?
Mhm.
And then these kids are now without a mother. There's a whole giant nuance to it, but my immediate reaction is anger, and that outflows seeds of hate.
yeah. Well, and I think too that we sometimes will view that as righteous anger. Like, well, we should be angry because
Mhm.
it should be okay that they died because they whatever,
Yes.
and that causes, that's not how we should be acting. That's, I mean, in a situation like that, frankly, you have a kid now that no longer has a mother.
Mhm.
Or, I mean, like I talked about, I've been watching these, where they're basically like in the interrogation room, things like that. Majority of the time, the only remorse that they show is the fact that they got caught. There's never
Yeah.
there's never really a point of, I'm sorry for what I did.
Yeah.
I'm sorry for the way that I did it to get caught.
Gosh.
And so that it's like this idea of, like, when, they're not really reconciling anything. It's just
Hmm.
you know, I'm sorry that I did it and got caught. Not, I'm sorry that I did it.
Yeah.
I'm sorry for doing that thing.
Gosh.
You know.
And we're going to get into judge not lest ye be judged. We're also going to get into an eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth kind of stuff. If your enemy offends you, all this stuff that is very difficult to receive and to play out in our lives. There is a place for judgment. There is a place for someone standing before the Lord and have to pay for what they did. But then there's another aspect to it where there's two people that you're going to see in heaven. Some people are not going to be there that you thought would be there, and some people are going to be there that you never thought would be there.
Mm-hmm.
And that's going to be an interesting thing, right? But the more surprising thing is that you will be there.
Yeah.
And that's kind of where Jesus is at. He's like, yeah, you know what? You're so quick to condemn murder, but you yourself are planting the seed of murder in your heart, and that's not the way I want my people to be. Another example, and this will be highly controversial, and so hopefully we can get a lot of angry comments over it. But something I've been thinking about a lot lately is our approach to condemning abortion. Now, I told you it's gonna be controversial, and there's a man named Andrew Clavin, and he has an interesting take on it. He says we need to stop publicly condemning people and calling them murderers for getting an abortion. I was like, hold up, abortion is murder. And he's like, yes, it is, but I like to call abortion homicide. And he says, because of the cultural moment that we are living in, people think that it is the only way and it is the only acceptable route, right? So if you're telling someone it's just a clump of cells, if you're telling someone it's okay to do it, this is the way out. This is just birth control. This is, it's the same as, you have your career in front of you and you're telling a young woman this, and then she opts to go that route. Turning around and saying, you murderer, is it helpful? No. We have tons of codes that allow for homicide as manslaughter. I didn't mean to do it, or I didn't know it was going to happen. Well, you still have, you still have to stand in judgment for it before the courts, but we're not going to categorize you a murderer the same way we're going to categorize this guy who lied in wait. Like O.J. Simpson's in the news lately. Like everybody knows he did it, right? It's like kind of like the joke is like everybody collectively agrees, but whatever. Are we going to categorize these people in the same category? Murderer, 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 murderer. So he says we need to start calling it homicide, because then it makes people go, wait, what are you talking about? Because you can actually commit homicide without knowingly be committing homicide. And as Jesus is saying, murder starts with hatred in your heart. I would really be hard pressed to see that every person who has undergone this procedure has had hatred in their heart, right? Now, again, very controversial, but the way that you're feeling right now with me saying that is undoubtedly the way they felt when Jesus was saying what he said about hatred in your heart towards murder.
Yeah.
Whether you agree with me or not. Now, Jesus is the authority, and everything that he says is true. And I'm not saying that it is right or acceptable to abort a human life. But what I am saying is our outsized reaction toward people who choose this route of taking, ending their pregnancy, sometimes results in hatred in our own heart.
Yes.
Towards those people, that's
Hostility.
not right. Yeah, and hostility towards them, that's not right either. The woman caught in adultery, and we're going to talk about this in a few weeks, but the woman caught in adultery by the letter of the law was to be stoned to death and to die. Jesus writes something in the sand. Who knows what he wrote? But it says that every one of her condemners walked away, oldest to youngest. So my thought is he was writing certain sins in the sand, and well, the older guys have committed a lot more of those sins, so they're going to walk away first, and then the younger guys are like, oh, yep, that's me. They walked away, and he says, woman, where are your accusers? And they're gone, obviously. And he says, okay, neither do I accuse you. Go and sin no more. Interesting. Now, had she walked away and committed the same sin again, but this time Jesus wasn't around to write in the sand, she's going to pay the consequence for her action.
Yeah.
The operative point of it is go and sin no more. There are people that are lost to sin. There are people that are lost to what society deems as acceptable sin. It's our job to go and love them, and that's going to be a hard thing to do, especially for people that have committed things that in our own hearts we couldn't conceive of committing. But we also have to look at what Jesus is writing in the sand and say, oh, wow, by the grace of God, I go. Thank God nobody knows any of those sins that I've committed in my own heart, these thoughts that I've had in my own mind towards others. We can extend that hand of grace and say, Christ loves you. Everything that you've done has been covered by the blood of the Lamb, and you could be washed clean. Now go and sin no more. Now that you know, go and sin no more. And I think inevitably, as this topic of murder comes around, it always ends up kind of circling back to the discussion of abortion. And I would caution us to not let that discussion create in us hate that also then creates in us the same condemnation as those that we are condemning. We need to look at what Jesus is writing in the sand, realize that we are forgiven. It's by the grace of God that we go, but then also in our kindness, offer grace, but then say, hey, you also need to go and sin no more. Same goes for me. Go and sin no more.
Yeah. Well, and I think too, the conversation about the the Pharisees and stuff, when we were talking about how, they were like whitewashed tombs, beautiful on the outside, but full of dead men's bones in the middle. That's the conversation where I think a lot of times we get so caught up in what everyone else is doing that we forget to look inside ourselves. And that, it's the same as the speck in the plank conversation where, you look at the speck in somebody else's eye, but you forget to, see the plank in your own.
Mm-hmm.
Things like that, where it's like we so often we get so much more involved, angry, whatever, at everyone else's problems when we forget that we have our own, and that we need to look internally as well and deal with our own spiritual things before we start calling people out.
Mm-hmm.
Because frankly, sometimes that works against you in the sense that you start calling people out and they're like, oh yeah, well, I know what you did. And Jesus knows what we did. God knows everything within us. And so if we're going to sit here and be judgmental, angry about these hot button topics that everyone is talking about, the conversation is, do we need to look inside first and really take that step of, okay, I've got things that I need to deal with before I start calling them out. And, frankly, like we'll continue to talk about this idea of judgment. Like, it is not our job to judge and be the judge. We have a judge, and it's not us, know?
When a lot of times we'll misunderstand that verse. We'll think that judging means condemning.
Yeah.
Because we do need to judge what's right and wrong. We do need to be able to stand on firm ground and say, yeah, abortion is wrong. But we also need to know that there are 6 things that God hates. It's scripture. 6 things, no, 7 things that are detestable to him. And one of those things is the shedding of innocent blood. You're like, okay, great. Any shedding of innocent blood, God hates that. So we need to look at what that is and define what that is and realize God hates that. But he also hates a tongue that is quick to sow dissension, right? So that's on equal playing fields.
That's not in there.
Yeah, it definitely
is. No. I usually skip over.
I would like to
skip over that one.
I'm doing it right now. I'm showing decision. And so there's things that we will put on our own spiritual hierarchy. Murder probably being one of them. Like, murder is the worst thing that you could do. It is a terrible thing to do. The shedding of innocent blood. Obviously, God hates that. But God also says he hates those who cause disunity.
Well, it's the big ones like murder that were like, oh yeah, I'd never do that.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what Jesus is doing here. He's going, oh, really? Well, if you do this, you've done that.
Yeah.
Well, I don't like that. Like,
nope.
I don't want to hear that, really.
Exactly. Yep.
Yep.
And
I mean, that again, that's going to be the topic of conversation for a while, because that's basically what this, this entire sermon is comparing things to other things and saying, okay, yeah, you've heard it said, but
Here's the truth.
Yeah.
Here's what's in your heart. Because that's what, God knows our heart. And the heart of man is wicked without the cleansing of the blood of the Lamb. So type your comments now.
Yeah.
We brought up the A word, so
it talks about anger can lead to judgment and insults. How does this warning against unchecked anger affect our relationships with others? Which, I think I covered that a lot. The conversation is the idea that when we continue to allow these things to permeate within our relationships, it's going to destroy them. I talked about landmines, but then also like this, it literally will divide your relationship when you continue to allow these things like anger, be a part of your relationship, because it's going to tear you down. It's going to tear the other down. And it's, again, stress, emotional trauma, mental things, and it's going to continue to add on to each other to make it worse till eventually the relationship is no longer there. And can't remember what the, dang it, why did it do that? Like the, let's see. Anger tears down relationships brick by brick, leaving behind rubble of shattered trust and broken connections. So like when we allow that anger, it's going to basically ruin the trust in the relationship, which is then going to cause the relationship to not exist anymore, or be not good and not healthy. And, it's I feel like the stay together for the kids, kind of thing, where it's like nothing is good around here, but we're going to do it because we feel like we have to.
Right.
And so it's like, how can you repair that relationship? How can you bring it back to unity?
Stay together because you want to honor the Lord, and you want to have a healthy marriage, and you want to love someone and have a support and have a helpmate, rather than just, well, I got to do it. And it's like, I get to do this,
Yeah. Well, and I think, that becomes the conversation of collaborating and coming together and, unifying for one common goal and saying, let's do this, let's work on this. And typically, especially when we're talking about anger, it is typically more of a man thing. It is something that we struggle with more just biologically. Like I said on Sunday, I don't know why that is. I'm assuming it's because we need to fight a bear or something like that.
Yeah.
But there's something that's like,
I've fought many bears.
Yes, totally.
And if there was a bear in Illinois, I would show you
nunchuck skills, bow hunting skills.
Exactly, yes.
Got skills.
Dude, there's an Instagram account, and I don't even remember what it's called, but it's this guy. He's like, how to take care of a bear. And then he like does this like ridiculous diatribe like of stuff that he's like, drop kick the bear when you're in the midair, aerial around him and stomp on his head. I'm like, oh. And he says,
it's totally gonna work.
He says, if you can bench 4,000 pounds a day, this shouldn't be a problem for you. It's the funniest thing I've ever seen.
Yeah. Well, and like it, it's just, it's so natural. I feel like when you think about anger, you think about men. That's like, men are angry. Like, and that's even the stigma, I feel like, too. Like, men are angry, women are emotional or whatever. Like, and it's so easy for us to just get angry. Like, I have some of the most anger I've had has been at my children because they're doing something just completely stupid.
Yeah.
And you're like, why am I feeling this way? Like, these are my kids. I love them, but why am I feeling this way? Why am I so angry right now from a toddler? Like, how did a toddler do this to me?
Yeah.
And it's just like, how can you, how can we fight that urge biologically to not be that way? So what are the ways that we can curb our anger and cause us to not necessarily go there every time. And like everything else, like you are still going to get angry. There's still anger. It's always going to be there. But how do I get out of that and not let it get to a rage or whatever to where it's uncontrollable?
Yeah.
And frankly, when we let it get to that level, that's typically where the damage begins to happen, because we're not thinking clearly. We're not, we're not saying the right things. Like we're letting typically our flesh completely just control everything that's coming out of our mouth.
Yeah.
And then we're sleeping on the couch or,
Yes.
Yeah.
Christ says that, the mouth speaks what the heart is full of. And that's very true. In
hot
anger,
lava.
yeah. Well, in anger, if your heart's full of anger, you're just going to spew destruction.
Yeah.
Man. And, James says that the tongue is a fire. It burns down everything, right? Just as you can put a bit in the mouth of a mighty horse, or a small rudder can move a ship, the tongue can move and destroy an entire life.
Yeah.
We've seen that over and over and over again. People exercise.
One false.
Yeah, man. It's just, I mean, who's the guy from Seinfeld, I forget the guy's name, but he played Kramer,
Yeah.
the weird guy. And he had just one bad night. Now, he had some anger and some hatred in his heart, and it came out one night at a comedy show, and it ruined his entire career and legacy.
Yeah.
I don't remember what he was doing or saying, but it was some pretty terrible stuff. And now everybody thinks of that actor as a guy who's guy full of hatred and not a good guy.
I mean, just like we talk about, with like restaurants, it's the one bad review that is the most, like when we say one thing that's said poorly or out of a bad headspace, that's the thing that people are going to remember. And that's the thing that, I mean, there are people that when they've lost a loved one or whatever, they remember what the last thing they said to them was.
Yeah, that's true.
And it is like, the last thing I said to my dad before he passed away was, "I hate you," things like that. And so when we let those things become unresolved, like that, sadly, it could be the last thing you say, or it could be the last time you speak to a person, or it could be not in death, but just like your relationship is ruined now and you will never speak to that person again because of what you say. And that, I mean, that's the weight of this topic, is it's like your words have power to build people up or completely tear a relationship apart.
Yeah.
So it talks about reconciling with your friend before you go to the altar, before you whatever. And so kind of the question is, why is it so important to do that before you're doing anything spiritually, like before you offer something or before you pray or before you come to church, things like that? Why is it so important to fix that personal relationship with that person? And I think the biggest thing is going to be just, it can cause you to not be in the right space. And so the conversation is like, you are, as a believer, we're supposed to come to God and leave everything. And if we're not leaving everything because we have something that's kind of hanging on us, then we need to go take care of that.
Yeah. Yeah, it says in Ecclesiastes, can two walk together if they're not in agreement? A three-braided cord is not easily broken. So there's three there. Christ is at the center.
The wedding verse.
Yeah, exactly. yeah. But it's for everyone,
exactly.
It's a three-braided cord is not easily broken. That the unity, there it is again, the tapestry of unity has to include a cord that is Christ. Yeah. And Christ, what did he do? He laid down his life for those who are accusing him. Christ was murdered. and it's funny because people say they murdered Christ, and so it's like, well, didn't Jesus say I give my life of my own accord? You know, well, interesting. If Jesus gave his life of his own accord, and no one takes my life, I give it up freely. Is it murder? Well, yes,
Yes.
because it starts in as hatred in your heart.
Mhm.
It's not just the act; it's the motive behind the act. Like we talked about, difference between homicide and murder.
Yeah.
Both are in that category, but there's a gradient of that, right? If we look at Cain, absolutely murder, clear. The blood of your brother cries out to me from the ground. Okay. But what about Moses? Moses killed someone
Mhm.
and then fled into the wilderness for 40 years and then became the chosen vessel for God to, liberate his people. What was that? Was it an accidental, was it done out of hatred in his heart? How was he then redeemed at the end of that? How could God take a murderer by all intents and purposes and then use him as such a mighty vessel, as a chosen vessel? That's a pretty crazy thing, right?
You're right. How can how can God take a I mean, that's kind of I mean, you look at the disciples, same exact thing. Like these dudes are crazy
Mm-hmm.
with the things that they did or struggle with.
The Apostle Paul.
Yeah, and then
persecuted and
you're
killed
like, oh, so
Christians.
he chose that guy, you know,
Yeah.
like, and then you go, oh, well, that makes sense why he could choose me,
Yes. David was a man after God's own heart, even though he orchestrated the murder of Uriah.
Yeah.
Moses committed homicide at the very least, right? However you want to say it,
Mm-hmm.
no one is beyond the reach of God. No one is beyond the saving of God if they turn and realize their need for God. We opened this entire sermon with, "Blessed are those who are poor in spirit," or another way of saying it, "Blessed are those who are poor and realize their need for God." That's what you need to do. You can't just abolish hatred and anger in your own heart. You have to allow God to change your heart, to give you a new heart. As it's what it says in the scriptures. I'm gonna put a new spirit in you. I'm gonna put a new heart within you, a heart that desires the things that I desire. And until you do that, uh, you're never going to be rid of the anger that keeps permeating your heart uh, until God changes your heart.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that kind of brings us to a place, uh, with the kind of the end and the main thing is, how do we, you know, with in light of the teachings that Jesus had, how can we, with this idea of kind of quickly reconciling with your adversary, how can we kind of promote peace and societal justice within our current world? Um, and so, this idea of like, I've wronged you, I'm going to apologize right now.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I mean, even in like recovery programs and things like that, you have this idea of reconciling with everyone, both those that have hurt you and those that you have hurt. And then the idea with that, like cell recovery, is that you have an ongoing active inventory where if I hurt someone today, I am reconciling that today,
Mm-hmm.
And so the idea is not to get to a place again where 30 years from now, you have a big long list of all the people you've hurt and the people that have hurt you,
Yeah.
but that you are consistently reconciling with those around you when you've hurt them
Mm-hmm.
and not allowing it to fester, like don't let the sun go down in your anger, like things like that, where it's it causes division when you allow it to even go overnight.
Mm-hmm.
It allows it to
Yeah.
fester when you go overnight.
Don't let the sun go down on your anger.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's a hard thing, but that takes humility, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It takes a tremendous amount of humility, and again, realizing your need for God to create in me a clean heart and renew a right spirit in me. The
Yeah.
spirit of humility, certainly.
Yeah. Well, and I think it takes, because the conversation is humility, but also it takes us being, I used Lord of the Rings, like this
Mhm.
beacon
Yeah, I like that a lot.
of hope, because when I am a beacon, those beacons around me have the ability to be lit,
Mhm.
and so all it takes is one person to say, I'm not going to let these feelings continue past this day. And then as people begin to see that, then they'll go, oh, maybe I should do that too. That makes them, I can see that there's a piece there, that there's, that there is a different kind of feeling there. And obviously, that kind of goes into like our current just societal unrest in a lot of
Mhm.
areas. We have multiple wars happening right now in our
Yeah.
world. We have multiple places where they're fighting for some form of political something,
Mhm.
where they're marching in the streets and doing all those kind of things, these social injustices or whatever. Um, and I think it's like, obviously, we're not a place where we can necessarily give those specific people advice, but how do we allow this teaching of
Mhm.
humility and being a beacon of hope and things, how can we make a difference in our society? um and that, like, that's a difficult thing. Obviously that's kind of the whole goal
Mhm.
of scripture, of being salt and light within
Yeah.
your community. But how can we do that? How can we practically take steps to be the light in our area and actually begin to change the culture?
Certainly don't want to be swayed by culture, driven by the culture, or taking our cues from the culture. We want to inform the culture, not just with our words, but with our actions.
Yeah.
And sometimes that's really hard to do when you're not close to the situation, or you have nothing really to offer except for prayer and practical love. Like this
Yeah.
this this conflict in the Middle East. You're not going to take up arms and go. You know, it's recording, right? Because I don't know, it's blacks. I don't know. Okay, good. This conflict in the Middle East, you're not going to take up arms and go over there and fight the fight or whatever. It's so far away, but because of the nature of the internet, we know about everything now,
Yeah.
right? But how you speak about it online, how you approach others who have opinions one way or the other, uh, that's an important thing. Not being driven by rage or anger, which is very easy to do when you see human atrocities, um, but to speak the truth with love. And one time I was driving my daughter to school. She was 6 or 7, and there was a homeless guy on the side of the car, which is not uncommon in Riverside. We figured he was on drugs or something because he was like yelling and gesturing behind us. We're like, oh great. So I'm like, can't wait till the light turns. And I could see my daughter's a little worried. So I said, okay, yeah, he's having a hard time. We'll pray for him because God loves him. We don't understand it, but God loves him. Well, then we realize he's not yelling and going crazy. There's a bunch of teenagers that are like throwing things at him and tormenting him a
Mhm.
little further back. And then my daughter realizes this and she goes, ugh, teenagers are the worst. I thought it was the funniest thing coming out of
Yeah.
a 6-year-old mouth. And then God gave me an opportunity to be like, oh, dang, why did you show me this, Lord? Because I do agree. Now that I have a teenager, they are the worst. But I, yeah, Christ died for that man. They should not be doing that
Yeah.
evil act toward that man over there. He died for them. But also, the hard thing that for us to wrap our minds around is he also died for the ones tormenting the man. He
Yeah.
also died for all those teenagers who you just deemed the worst. They're worthy of the bloodshed of the king. And that's a hard thing for us to wrap our minds around. We will look at the atrocities of Hamas and think, oh, that's the worst. And then it'll boil our blood. But the hard thing for us to wrap our minds around is Christ died for those soldiers who do those atrocities. And it's like, we don't understand it. The message of the cross is foolishness to those who don't believe. But hey, that evil exists inside of me. And I need to let Christ stamp it out inside my own heart, knowing that for God so loved the world, that includes all those crazies in the murder podcasts. He died for them too. That includes those that are hard to love, those that we harbor hatred towards, those that have hurt us so deeply that we can't ever see reconciling with that person. Christ died for that person. He's given us the ministry of reconciliation. He has broken down the barrier wall. So we need to grab hold of that. And even when it's hard, to know that, again, by the grace of God, I go, where are my accusers? I have none. I need to go and sin no more. And I need to pray. And I need to constantly be seeking the Lord on behalf of those who are being harmed, but also knowing that God is not willing that any would perish, even our enemies.
And I think the thing we forget, because you said the truth and love, I think a lot of times we forget the love part, and so it's, we have a responsibility. And I think the other thing too, everyone jokes about the thoughts and prayers, because a lot of times that's become an empty promise.
Right.
How many people, when they say, I will pray for you, are actually praying for that person, and so I think that it takes us saying, I'm going to actually do that. I'm going to take action in ways that I can. And, sometimes when there's something, a thought in our head, and we're like, man, I wish somebody would do something about that. Sometimes it means it's you.
Yeah.
And so taking action and not just, praying for somebody to do it.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's you. When you have something so heavy on your heart, and you have something that is sitting there and you can't get it out of your head, and you're like, man, I need to pray for somebody to do that. Yeah. Sometimes you are the person that God is calling. You are the answer to the prayer.
Yep.
And so it takes action. And, I know that obviously doesn't necessarily have to do with like this passage, but the idea is that we need to take action and do things, and do them willingly, and do them quickly, and not just sit on it.
Yeah.
And so that goes for reconciliation, but that also goes for taking action in certain circumstances.
Yeah.
And so I think, I don't know what the challenges are this week, but I feel like there is one coming up that's very like hard, action steppy, like that. But I hope that, as we've continued to kind of flesh out these things, that you can have a better understanding, and feel free to leave questions. We're just kind of coming up with them right now, but if there is anything that you're like, man, I really, really want to understand this, we would love to answer those, as we continue to kind of head through this series.
Yep. There's a great story of the man who was drowning, and he says, God save me, God save me. And so this guy rolls up in a boat, and he's like, jump in. He's like, no, God's going to save me. All right. And goes away, and he goes, God save me, please, God save me. And a helicopter comes by, and he's like, here's a rope, grab it. He goes, no, God will save me. And you're like, God save me. And then the guy drowns. And when he gets to heaven, he goes,
why didn't you save me?
He goes, I gave you a boat and a helicopter.
Yeah.
Like, sometimes we're just looking for the
specific,
super miraculous thing that is in our mind that God's going to do in our life. But the reality of it is like, it's right there.
No, I'm not going to Chris Angel you out of the water.
Yes. Yeah. That would be cool. Yep.
But
Yep. And so the challenge is this on Friday, or was on Friday. Often anger stems from misunderstandings or a lack of empathy, right? When you get angry with someone, try to put yourself in their shoes. Spend some time thinking about the situation from their perspective. What might they be feeling or experiencing? Praying for the ability to understand and empathize with others can soften your heart to lead to more compassionate interactions. Pause and reflect. The next time you feel anger rising within you, take a deliberate pause. Step away from the situation and give yourself a moment to breathe deeply and pray. Ask God to help you to understand the root of your anger and to respond with a way that reflects His love and patience. This practice helps prevent immediate, even regrettable reactions and aligns your response with grace. So
Yeah.
that'll be a hard one.
Yeah. It's just like the pause. Sometimes that's literally the best thing you can do is just take a breath.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I teach that to my children. Like when they're frustrated, whatever, take a deep breath. And a lot of times I definitely do not do that. Because I'm like, I'm mad. I don't want to take a deep breath.
Yep.
But sometimes it's just like sometimes the most spiritual thing you can do is take a nap.
Yeah.
Like if you're in this mindset where you're like, I'm overwhelmed, I can't, whatever, literally sometimes the best thing you can do is just lay down
Right.
and just
Remove yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah. What's the acronym is HALT, when you're faced with a decision that might be damaging, halt. Don't make any decisions when you're hurt, angry, lonely, or tired. Hurt, angry, lonely, or tired. I actually like to change it to hungry.
Yeah.
Angry.
Yeah. Go
lonely,
to Walmart when you're hungry
or tired. He's
Yeah.
like, you don't shop when you're hungry. You don't make rash decisions when you're angry, when you're feeling lonely, or when you're tired. It's like, oh man, I hate my job. Well, I'm feeling hurt. I was looked over for this promotion. I'm angry because of that. And it's leading to loneliness, and I haven't slept well. I'm just gonna quit my job. It's like, hold up, don't do that. Halt. Take some time to survey the land and realize that it's not as bad as you might be seeing it as.
Yeah. I mean, that's really good. I think just the idea of like any high level of emotion or anything like that, the ability to pause and say, hold on, like let me take a breath. Because even sometimes when you're excited, you make poor decisions because you're just like, yeah, gung ho, I'm going to do this. And then it's like, what did I just get myself into?
I know. Yeah, definitely. Like I was like, I can't believe I get to be the lead pastor.
Maybe we need to make a new one that's longer.
Yeah, hungry.
Like
lonely,
when
tired.
sometimes when you play a game of skate, like you just add letters like, Skater. Oh, we're gonna do skateboard today.
Yeah. So I don't
like,
lose. But yeah,
halt and stop.
No, halt. Yeah. Halt. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah,
halter. I don't know. No, I understand because I was excited. I'm the lead pastor of Cross Church, and then I realized how cold it gets, and I was like, oh, I shouldn't have made that decision when I was excited.
Yeah.
No, I'm kidding. The weather's actually not that bad. People are always like, "Oh, the weather is probably so terrible. How do you like the weather?"
It hasn't been that bad.
I'm like, okay, it's cold, but my office is climate controlled, so
yeah,
I'm fine.
Yeah,
I can wear some cool jackets. We're all good.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you for listening to or watching this week's podcast. We hope that you can join us on Sunday. What do we talk about?
Oh, Lust? It's going to be even more fun than last week.
Yeah.
Murder. No, not a problem for me. Hatred.